There are things a man says in a crowded room that he believes no one will remember. He is always wrong. The woman he says them to remembers every word, the precise tone, the exact angle of his head, the way the candlelight caught the indifference in his eyes. She carries it home with her like a stone in her pocket, and it is still there in the morning and the morning after that and every morning for the rest of her life. The Duke of Marath said 4 words to Viola Ashby on the evening of the 15th of October, at the Grantham Autumn reception, in a room full of people who were pretending to talk to each other while actually watching everyone else. He said them quietly. That was the part she would remember longest, not the words themselves, but the quietness. The casual, unhurried quietness of a man who had never once considered that the person he was speaking to might matter. Viola had been standing near the east window with a glass of wine she hadn't particularly wanted, watching the room with the composed expression she had spent years perfecting. The one that said, "I am exactly where I intend to be," in a voice that cost her nothing and gave nothing away. She was wearing her good dress. Her only good dress, technically, though that was not a distinction she advertised. It was pale blue, well-made, 4 years old, and she had pressed it herself that morning on the kitchen table because there was no longer anyone else to press it. The Duke passed her on his way to somewhere more important. He slowed. He didn't stop, not entirely, but there was a fractional pause, a slight inclination of his head, as though something had caught his attention the way an unpleasant smell catches attention. Then he said, in a voice pitched precisely low enough to reach only her, "Do you always bring the smell of a poor house into other people's rooms, Miss Ashby?" And he walked on. The woman to Viola's left had heard. The man behind her had heard. She could tell by the quality of the silence that bloomed outward from the moment like a ripple. The suddenly very focused attention on wine glasses, on ceiling moldings, on anything that was not Viola Ashby standing by the east window. She did not move. She stood exactly where she was, with her glass of wine and her pressed dress and her composed expression, and she waited until the ripple had settled and the room had rearranged itself around the moment and moved on. Then she finished her wine, set the glass down on the tray of a passing footman, smoothed her skirt. She did not look for the Duke. She did not cry. She went home. The house was quiet when she returned. It was always quiet now. That was one of the things she was still adjusting to, the particular quality of a house that used to hold more people and no longer did. It wasn't an empty quiet. It was a remembering quiet. Every room in it knew what it used to sound like. Hobbs was waiting in the entrance hall with the careful, unhurried posture of a man who had decided, somewhere in the last 2 years, that the most useful thing he could do was simply be present. He was 64 years old and had worked for the Ashby family for 31 of them, and had stayed on after Robert Ashby's death at a salary that Viola could not quite afford, and that he had not once mentioned. He took her coat without a word. She stood in the hallway for a moment, looking at nothing in particular. "I'll make tea," Hobbs said. "Thank you," she said. She went to the small sitting room, the one they still used, the one with the fireplace that drew properly, and sat in the chair nearest the grate and looked at the fire. It was a modest fire. She had become quite skilled in the past 2 years at modest fires. You learned the exact amount of coal required to heat a room to the precise temperature of acceptable without crossing into wasteful, and then you stopped thinking about it. She had learned a great many things like that. Hobbs brought the tea, set it on the table beside her, did not ask about the evening. This was one of the things she valued most about him, his absolute refusal to ask the questions that would require her to answer them. He had been there the morning after her father's solicitor had come with the full accounting of the debts. He had made tea then too. He had not asked a single thing. She poured her cup, held it, the smell of a poor house. She turned the phrase over in her mind the way you probe a sore tooth, carefully, deliberately, to understand the precise dimensions of the damage. It was a cruel thing. She was not naive enough to pretend it wasn't. But cruelty came in many forms, and she had learned to categorize them. There was the cruelty of people who didn't know they were being cruel, which was almost forgivable. The cruelty of people who knew and didn't care, which was ordinary. And the cruelty of people who knew, cared, and chose the exact word that would land in the exact place that would hurt the most. The Duke of Marath was not a stupid man, which meant he had known exactly what he was doing. She drank her tea. She had met James Marath twice before the reception. Both times briefly, both times in rooms larger than conversation allowed. She had formed no particular impression of him except that he was tall, that he spoke rarely and expected to be listened to when he did, and that he had the particular quality of self-possession that came not from ease but from never having been made to feel uneasy. She understood that quality. She had worked very hard to manufacture a version of it herself. The difference, she supposed, was that his had come free of charge. The Marath estate was 3 miles from the village. She had passed it occasionally on the road, the long stone wall, the iron gate, the avenue of oaks that disappeared into the grounds. It was the kind of estate that announced itself without effort, the way very old money announced itself, simply by existing and being large and having been there longer than anything around it. Her father had spoken of the Maraths occasionally. She was trying to remember now, in the sitting room with her tea, what he had said. Something about the old Duke James's father being a fair man. Something about a transaction long ago, the details of which she had not paid sufficient attention to at the time, because at the time she had been 19 and insufficiently interested in her father's business affairs. She was paying attention to a great many things now that she had previously considered someone else's concern. The Duke of Marath, she learned over the following weeks from the particular social information network that operated invisibly but efficiently through every drawing room in the county, was 38 years old, unmarried, and considered an excellent match by every family with a daughter of appropriate age. He was also considered by the same families to be somewhat difficult, exacting, the sort of man who noticed everything and commented on whatever he found deficient. This was said, she observed, with admiration. She filed this information away without particular comment. She went to the events she was invited to because not going had its own costs, the gradual social attrition that happened to women who withdrew, the way absence was interpreted as shame, and shame as confirmation of whatever story the room had already decided to tell. She went, and she wore her good dress, and she performed the composed expression, and she spoke to people who spoke to her and did not speak to people who didn't. The Duke of Marath was at 3 of these events. She did not avoid him. Avoidance implied effort, implied awareness, implied that he occupied enough of her attention to require management. She simply did not seek him out. When he was in a room, she knew where he was the way you know where a piece of furniture is in the dark, not by looking, but by the shape of the space around it. He was always, she noticed without intending to notice, also aware of where she was. She chose not to examine this. It was Mrs. Alderton who said what no one else had said. Helena Alderton was 71 years old, had been widowed for 20 years, owned her opinions outright and apologized for none of them, and had taken what she described as a sensible interest in Viola since Robert Ashby's death. She had no daughters of her own. She had no patience for pretending that rooms were nicer than they were. She found Viola at the Pemberton card evening, and sat beside her with the directness of a woman who had long since stopped performing a rival. "I heard what he said to you at the Grantham reception," she said. "No preamble, no softening. I want you to know that I heard it, and that every person within 12 feet of you heard it, and that not one of them has forgotten it." She looked at Viola steadily. "I also want you to know that you handled it with more grace than the occasion deserved." Viola looked at her. "Thank you, Mrs. Alderton." "I'm not complimenting you," the old woman said. "I'm informing you there's a difference." She picked up her cards. "He was wrong to say it. He knows he was wrong to say it. Men like that always know. They simply calculate that the knowing costs them nothing. Whether he will ever do anything about the knowing is a separate question." She arranged her hand with the precise attention of a woman who played to win. "I thought you should understand the full picture." Viola considered this. "And what is the full picture?" "That you have more allies in that room than you think," Mrs. Alderton said, "and that he has fewer friends than he believes." She looked up briefly. "Now, do you play whist?" She found the box on a Tuesday. She had been clearing the small study at the back of the house, the room that had been her father's, the one she had left untouched for the better part of 2 years because some rooms require a certain distance before you can enter them practically. She was being practical now. There were things in it that could be sold, things that could be sorted, things that had been waiting long enough. The box was at the back of the lower desk drawer, beneath a stack of old correspondence that she had set aside to read later. It was a plain wooden box, the kind used for documents, with a small brass latch. Her father's initials were stamped on the lid. She set it on the desk. She looked at it for a moment. Then she put it with the other things she was setting aside, closed the drawer, and went to make her own tea because Hobbs had gone to the village. She did not open it, not that day. That night she lay in the dark and thought about nothing in particular, which was the method she had developed for thinking about everything at once without any of it becoming unbearable. The house settled around her. A branch moved against the window. Somewhere down the lane a dog was briefly, distantly concerned about something. She thought about her father, about the way he had said the Maraths not dismissively, not with resentment, but with a particular quality she couldn't name now, something between respect and something else, something that might have been history. She turned over. She thought, "I should look at those papers." She thought, not yet. She slept. In the morning the box was still on the desk where she had left it, exactly as she had left it, waiting with the patient permanence of things that contain information you are not yet ready to have. She made her tea. She sat at the kitchen table. She did not open it, but she did not put it away either. The Duke of Marath sent a calling card 3 days after the Pemberton card evening. Viola found it on the hall table when she came downstairs, placed there by Hobbs with the careful neutrality of a man who had opinions he was not sharing. It was a standard card, heavy cream stock, engraved name, no message. The kind of card that said "I called" without saying anything about why. She picked it up. She put it in the top drawer of the hall table. She went about her day. He called again on Thursday. She was in the back garden when Hobbs came to find her, attempting to do something useful about the state of the kitchen garden, which had developed opinions of its own over the past 2 seasons, and was no longer entirely accepting of outside authority. She had dirt on her gloves and a realistic assessment of how much of this she was going to be able to manage alone. "The Duke of Marath, miss," Hobbs said. She straightened up, looked at him. Hobbs looked back with the expression he used when he was waiting for instructions, and had no personal investment in the outcome whatsoever, which was to say, the expression he had been using consistently for 31 years, while clearly having a great deal of personal investment in nearly everything. "Tell him," Viola said, "that I don't recall the conversation he's likely here to discuss." Hobbs considered this. "And if he asks what conversation?" "Then he'll know I mean it," she said. She went back to the garden. Hobbs went back to the house. She heard, distantly, the front door, then the quiet that meant he had gone. She pulled up a weed with more force than strictly necessary. He sent another card on Friday, and one the following Monday. By the end of the 3rd week, there were 7 cards in the top drawer of the hall table. Viola had developed a habit of opening the drawer every few days and looking at them, not to count them exactly, but in the way you check on something that you've decided not to act on, to confirm that you've still decided. She had still decided. The social calendar in November was, as it always was, relentless in the way that November required, a closing in of drawing rooms and card tables and afternoon calls, the county folding inward on itself, as the weather made the outdoors inadvisable, and everyone who had spent the summer pretending to prefer fresh air now rediscovered their tolerance for other people's sitting rooms. Viola attended what she was invited to. She wore her good dress. She performed the expression. The Duke of Marath attended most of the same events. She had expected this to be awkward. It was not awkward. Awkwardness required both parties to acknowledge the thing between them, and Viola had decided, with the quiet precision she applied to most things that needed managing, that there was no thing between them. There was a remark he had made. There was her drawer full of calling cards. There was occasionally the awareness of him at the far end of a room, tall, composed, watching something she was fairly certain was her without ever quite catching him at it. None of this was a thing. She was a woman with a modest fire and a kitchen garden with opinions. She did not have the resources for things. It was at the Whitmore dinner that she laughed. She hadn't intended to, or rather, she hadn't calculated it. Mrs. Alderton had said something about a mutual acquaintance's new hat that was so precisely, devastatingly accurate that Viola had laughed before she'd finished hearing it. A real laugh, not the polished social version, the unguarded kind that surprised you on its way out. She didn't notice the Duke. She didn't notice him stop mid-sentence in his conversation with Lord Pemberton. She didn't notice the way he turned, not fully, just fractionally, the smallest possible movement that could still be called turning, toward the sound. She didn't notice any of this. Lord Pemberton noticed all of it. He waited until the moment had passed and then said, with the tone of a man raising a subject he'd been waiting to raise, "James." "Don't," said the Duke. "I haven't said anything." "You were about to." Pemberton picked up his wine. "I was going to say that she has a remarkable laugh." "Pemberton." "And that I haven't heard you laugh like that in." "I wasn't laughing." "No," said Pemberton pleasantly. "You weren't, that was rather my point." He drank his wine. "You were cruel to her at the Grantham reception, in front of 30 people." The Duke said nothing. "I know you know that," Pemberton said. "I'm not telling you something you don't know. I'm telling you that the knowing on its own is not sufficient." He set his glass down. "Fix it, James." "She won't receive me." "No," said Pemberton. "She won't." He looked across the room to where Viola was now speaking with apparent contentment to an elderly gentleman about something that seemed to be genuinely interesting to both of them. "That should tell you something." "It tells me she has every right." "It tells you," Pemberton said, "that she is not waiting for you to fix it for her own sake. She has already managed perfectly well without your acknowledgement." A pause. "The question is what you intend to do about it for yours." The Duke looked at him. Then he looked across the room. Viola was not looking at him. She was listening to the elderly gentleman with the full, genuine attention she apparently brought to everything, the kind of attention that made whoever had it feel that they were the most interesting person in the room. The Duke had noticed this about her before. He had been noticing it with increasing and somewhat inconvenient frequency for 7 weeks. He picked up his wine. He said nothing, but he didn't look away. He called on a Wednesday in December, in the mid-morning, without sending word ahead. Viola was in the small sitting room with the household accounts, the quarterly reckoning that she performed with the concentrated focus of someone diffusing something, when Hobbs appeared in the doorway. "The Duke of Marath, miss." She did not look up from the page. "Is he?" "At the front door, in person." A pause. "He appears to have walked from the road." She set her pen down. She looked at the numbers in front of her. The coal column. The grocery column. The column she had labeled miscellaneous because it was easier than the alternative labels, which were pride and maintenance of the fiction that everything is fine. "Tell him," she said, "that I don't recall." "Miss Ashby." Hobbs's voice was gentle, which was the voice he used when he thought she was wrong and was too loyal to say so plainly. "He's been standing in the cold." She looked at him. He looked back with 31 years of quiet opinion. She picked up her pen, put it down again, looked at the window, which showed a gray December morning and the bare branches of the elm that needed attention. "Tell him," she said, "that I am engaged this morning and cannot receive callers." Hobbs went. She heard the front door. She heard very faintly his voice, low, unhurried, the voice of a man who had prepared for this. She could not make out the words. Then quiet. Then Hobbs again in the doorway. "He left a card," Hobbs said. He was holding it. He looked at it briefly before placing it on the table beside her. He also said, a pause. "He asked me to tell you that he would come back, every day if necessary, until you'd allow him 5 minutes. Viola looked at the card. "He won't," she said. "No, miss," said Hobbs in the tone he used when he disagreed completely. "He came back on Thursday, and Friday, and the following Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. On Thursday of the second week, which brought the total to 8 consecutive visits, none of which she had received. Viola put on her coat and her good gloves and walked to Mrs. Alderton's house, which was 20 minutes on foot, and which she needed 20 minutes on foot to reach in the condition she was currently in, which was not a condition she intended to describe to anyone, including herself. Mrs. Alderton opened the door herself, looked at Viola's face and said, "Come in, I'll put the kettle on." They sat in the old woman's kitchen, which was warm in a way that the Ashby sitting room was not quite managing this week, and drank tea, and Viola said nothing about the Duke for a long time, and Mrs. Alderton did not ask. Eventually Viola said, "He keeps coming." "Yes," said Mrs. Alderton. "I keep not receiving him." "Yes. I don't know what he wants." Mrs. Alderton looked at her over her teacup with the expression of a woman who knew exactly what he wanted and considered it Viola's own business to figure it out. "Don't you?" "I know what he thinks he wants," Viola said. "He wants to apologize. He wants to feel that he's done the correct thing. He wants the account settled." She turned her cup in her hands. "That's not the same as what he wants." Mrs. Alderton was quiet for a moment. "No," she said, "it isn't. I'm not interested in settling his account." "Of course not." The old woman set her cup down. "But I wonder if you've considered that he may have come to the same conclusion." She looked at Viola steadily. 8 consecutive visits is not a man settling an account, my dear. A man settling an account sends a letter. Viola looked at the table. She thought about the drawer, the 7 cards, 9 now, that she had not thrown away. She had not examined why she had not thrown them away. She had not thrown them away because there was no particular reason to throw them away. That was all. The drawer had space. "He was cruel," she said. "Yes," said Mrs. Alderton, "he was. 1 visit doesn't, 9 visits don't." "No," the old woman agreed. "They don't. Nothing undoes it." A pause. "But the question of what a person does after they've done something they cannot undo is, I've always thought, the more interesting question." She looked out the kitchen window at the gray December garden. "Your father was a great believer in that question." Viola looked up. "He and Robert Ashby spoke occasionally," Mrs. Alderton said, and something in her voice shifted slightly, the way voices shifted when they were approaching something true. "Your father was a man who understood the difference between what people did and what they were capable of. He was very patient with that distinction." She picked up her cup again. "I always admired it." Viola said nothing. She thought about her father, about the box on the desk that she had not opened. She drank her tea. She received him on a Friday. Not graciously, she would not call it gracious. She told Hobbs to show him to the sitting room, and she finished the paragraph she was reading, and then she went. He was standing when she came in. He had not sat, had not, apparently, even considered sitting, which she noted without comment. He was holding his hat in both hands with the constrained, effortful stillness of a man who was not accustomed to not knowing how a room would go. Good, she thought. She sat. She did not invite him to. He sat anyway, after a moment, across from her, with the expression of a man who had prepared a speech and was now reconsidering every word of it. She waited. "Miss Ashby," he said. "Your Grace," a pause. "I said something to you at the Grantham reception," he said. "That was," he stopped, started again. "That was designed to diminish you in a room full of people. It was calculated and it was wrong, and I have been unable to another stop. His jaw tightened slightly. I am not practiced at this. No, she said, I imagine not. He looked at her. I am sorry for what I said, not for the form of it, not the social version, genuinely. The room was quiet. The fire was modest. The curtains were 4 years old. Outside, the elm needed attention. Viola looked at this man, at the uncomfortable, effortful sincerity in his face. The thing he was doing that was clearly costing him something. The hat still turning slightly in his hands. And she thought about what Mrs. Alderton had said. The more interesting question. Thank you, Your Grace, she said. She stood, he blinked. That's. I appreciate you coming, she said, repeatedly. The smallest pause. Hobbs will show you out. She left the room. She stood in the hallway and listened to the quality of the silence from the sitting room. The silence of a man who had not gotten what he came for and was determining what to do about that. And she felt, for the first time in 2 months, something that was not entirely unpleasant. She went upstairs. She sat at the small desk in her room. After a long moment, she opened the top drawer, took out the 9 calling cards and looked at them. She put them back. She did not throw them away. The box was still on the desk in her father's study. She opened it that evening. Not because of anything in particular. Not because of the Duke, or the visit, or Mrs. Alderton's careful words about her father and his patience with the distinction between what people did and what they were capable of. Not for any reason she was prepared to name. She unlatched the brass clasp and lifted the lid. Inside were documents, folded papers, some yellowed at the edges, some newer, letters, a small leather notebook, and at the very bottom, beneath everything else, a sealed envelope with her name on it in her father's handwriting. She picked up the envelope, held it, set it aside for now. She began with the documents. The first 3 were routine estate papers, boundary surveys, lease agreements, the ordinary paperwork of a family that had owned land for generations. She set them aside. The 4th was a letter, dated 18 years ago, addressed to her father from a solicitor she didn't recognize. She read it. Then she read it again. She sat back in the chair. Outside, the December wind moved through the elm. The modest fire in the grate needed attention. Somewhere in the house Hobbs was doing something quiet and useful, as he always was. Viola held the document in her hands and looked at her father's name at the top of it, Robert Ashby-esque, and thought about all the things she had not known, and all the things she had not thought to ask, and the particular grief of understanding someone more completely after they were no longer there to be understood. She sat in her father's chair for a long time. Then she picked up the sealed envelope with her name on it, and she opened it. The letter was 4 pages long. Her father had written it 2 months before he died. She could tell by the handwriting, which was still firm but had acquired the slight deliberateness of a man who was choosing his words with unusual care. Not the quick, practical hand of his correspondence. The hand of someone writing something they had been putting off for a long time. She read it by the fire in his study, in his chair, with the document from the solicitor on the table beside her, and the rest of the box still open and waiting. My dear Viola, if you are reading this, then I have left things in a state of disorder that I should have addressed while I was still present to address them. I am sorry for that. I was, in this particular matter, a coward, which is a quality I hope you have not inherited, though I suspect from the evidence that you are rather braver than I was. There is a document in this box relating to the Marath estate. I want you to understand what it is before someone else explains it to you in terms that may not serve your interests. In the autumn of 1809, the late Duke of Marath, James Marath's father, came to me with a difficulty. The estate was solvent in land but not in capital. A legal dispute over the original title grant had been raised by a distant claimant, and without immediate funds to contest it properly, the title itself was at risk. The late Duke was a proud man and did not find it easy to ask, but he asked. I lent him the money. Not through a bank directly, personally, from the remains of what your grandfather had left me. It was, I will be honest with you, nearly everything I had in liquid form at the time. Your mother was not entirely pleased. In return, the late Duke signed a document acknowledging the debt and attaching, as security, a portion of the Marath estate title, a legal instrument that meant, in plain terms, that the Marath title could not be transferred, contested, or sold without the resolution of that debt or the consent of its holder. The debt was never formally repaid, not because the late Duke was dishonest, he was not, but because he died before the arrangement was settled, and his son inherited an estate whose papers I suspect were not thoroughly examined, and here is the cowardice, did not pursue it. I did not want to be the man who arrived at a new duke's door demanding payment. And then the years passed, and it became the sort of thing one means to address and does not. The document is legally sound. I had it reviewed in 1817. It remains in effect. What you do with this information is entirely your decision. You owe the Marath family nothing. But I want you to know, and this is the part I find hardest to write, that James Marath's father was a good man who was kind to me when kindness was not required. Whatever his son may be, I would ask you to hold that separately. The signature on the deed is mine. The estate, in a technical sense, has always been partly yours. I should have told you sooner. I am sorry that I didn't. With all my love, your father Viola read the letter twice. Then she folded it along its original crease and placed it back in the envelope. She picked up the document from the solicitor. Read it again, more carefully this time, with the letter's explanation beside her, following the legal language to its conclusion. Her father was right. It was legally sound. She could see that even without a solicitor's opinion, which she would need eventually, but the instrument was clear, the signature unambiguous, the terms exactly what he had described. She set it down. She sat in the chair for a long time, watching the fire reduce itself to embers, thinking about an autumn evening in 1809 that she had not been alive for her father at his desk, counting what remained of his capital, deciding to give nearly all of it to a proud man who had asked. Her mother not entirely pleased. The years passing. The debt sitting quietly in a box in a drawer, waiting. She thought about James Marath inheriting an estate whose papers he had perhaps not thoroughly examined. She thought about a man standing in her sitting room with his hat in his hand saying, "I am not practiced at this." She thought about 9 calling cards in a drawer. She did not sleep well. She went to Mrs. Alderton in the morning. Not for advice. She had made certain decisions by the time she arrived, and she was not looking to have them unmade. She went because Mrs. Alderton was the only person she trusted to hear the full account without either dramatizing it or diminishing it, and because there was a particular relief in saying a thing aloud to someone who would simply listen. She told her everything. The box, the letter, the document, the legal instrument, the signature. Mrs. Alderton listened without interrupting, which was one of her better qualities. When Viola had finished, the old woman was quiet for a moment. "Does he know?" she said. "I don't think so. My father believed he hadn't examined the papers thoroughly." "Will you tell him?" Viola looked at her hands. "Yes." "Why?" It was a direct question, and it deserved a direct answer. Viola had been working on the answer since approximately 2 o'clock that morning. "Because it's his estate," she said, "and because my father asked me to hold his father separately from whatever his son may be, and because," she stopped, pressed on, "because I am not interested in leverage. I never have been." Mrs. Alderton looked at her for a long moment. "Your father," she said, "would have been very proud of that sentence." Viola said nothing. She looked at the old woman's kitchen window, at the pale winter light coming through it, at the bare garden beyond. "There is one other reason," she said quietly. "I know," said Mrs. Alderton. "I haven't decided what to do with it yet." "I know that too," the old woman said. "Take your time." She sent a note that afternoon. Formal, brief, Exactly the kind of note you sent when you were inviting someone to discuss a matter of business, which was what this was. It did not refer to the calls, or the cards, or the sitting room, or any of the things that existed between them in the category of not a thing that she had not been examining. She asked him to call on Tuesday at 11 o'clock. He arrived at 10:55. She received him in the study, her father's study, which she had cleaned and ordered since that evening with the box, which now felt like the right room for this conversation. The document was on the desk. The letter was in the drawer. She had decided she would show him the document and read him the relevant portions of the letter. She had decided she would be matter-of-fact about it. She was matter-of-fact about it. She showed him the document first, without explanation, and watched his face while he read it. He read carefully. He was, she had noted before, a man who read carefully, and she observed the moment he understood what he was looking at. A slight change in his posture, a stillness that was not his ordinary composed stillness but something deeper. He looked up. "This is your father's signature," he said. "Yes." "This document," he looked at it again, "this has been in effect for 18 years, she said. "Yes." He set it down on the desk with the controlled care of a man managing a strong reaction. "Did you know?" "I found it 4 days ago, in a box in this desk." She paused. "My father left me a letter explaining it. I'll read you the relevant portions." She read him the relevant portions. The study was very quiet while she read. When she finished, she folded the letter and put it back in the drawer and looked at him. He was looking at the document on the desk. His expression was, she tried to find the word for it, not the carefully managed face she had catalogued across dozens of rooms and 9 consecutive visits. Something beneath that. Something that was working through multiple things at once and not finding easy resolution. "Your father saved my family's estate," he said. "And then he stopped." "Yes," she said. The word landed quietly, not as an accusation, simply as confirmation. He looked at her then, really looked at her, with the full, uncomfortable honesty of a man who was not being permitted to look away from something, and had stopped trying. "Miss Ashby," he said, "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything today," she said. "I showed you this because it's yours to know. What you do with it is your concern." She looked at him steadily. "My solicitor will contact yours about the legal resolution. It's straightforward. The debt was effectively settled by time and circumstance, and the instrument can be retired cleanly. There's no claim being made." He stared at her. "You're not?" "No," she said. "You could." "I know what I could do," she said. "I'm not interested." He was quiet for a moment. "Why not?" he said. It was the same question Mrs. Alderton had asked. He deserved the same honest answer. "Because my father didn't do it for leverage," she said. "He did it because a man asked him for help and he had it to give." She paused. "I would like to honor that." The fire crackled. Outside the window the elm stood bare and patient against the winter sky. James Marath looked at Viola Ashby across her father's desk. At this woman who had been handed a weapon she hadn't asked for and had placed it on the table between them and told him it wasn't a weapon. And something in his face changed in a way that was permanent. She could see that it was permanent. Some shifts were visible the moment they happened, and this was one of them. "Viola," he said, not Miss Ashby, her name, the first time. She looked at him. "I said something to you at the Grantham reception," he said, "that I have thought about every day since. Not because of this," he gestured at the document. "Before I knew any of this, I want you to understand that." "I know," she said. "I don't know how to undo it." "You can't," she said. "That's not how it works." "No," he looked at his hands briefly, then back at her. "Then I would like to spend a considerable amount of time doing something else instead, if you'll allow it." The room was quiet. Viola thought about a drawer full of calling cards, about a laugh she hadn't calculated, in a room full of people, that had made a man turn toward the sound without meaning to. About her father's handwriting on a letter that said, "I would ask you to hold that separately, and I suspect you are rather braver than I was." She thought about modest fires and kitchen gardens with opinions, and the particular relief of being entirely, completely yourself in a room where you had expected to perform. She looked at James Marath. "You may call on Thursday," she said. Something moved through his expression, not quite a smile, but the architecture of one, the possibility. "Thursday," he said. "At 11 o'clock. I'll be there at 10:55, he said. "I know," said Viola. And this time, when he left, she did not go upstairs and sit on the edge of the bed and stare at the wall. She went to the hall table, opened the top drawer, took out the 9 calling cards. She held them for a moment. Then she put them in her pocket and went to find Hobbs to tell him they'd be needing tea on Thursday. 1 year later, the Marath Library was warm in December. It was a good library, the kind that had been assembled over generations by people who actually read, which was rarer than it should have been, and which Viola had spent the better part of the year exploring with the focused pleasure of someone who had been given a very large and well-stocked room and told it was hers, which it was, which still, occasionally, on quiet afternoons, struck her as remarkable. She was in the chair nearest the window with a book open on her lap and a cup of tea growing cold on the table beside her. The afternoon light was thin and pale, the good winter kind that came in low and turned the room gold for an hour before the dark came. Outside, the oak avenue was bare. The grounds were frost quiet. She heard him before she saw him, the particular sound of his step in the corridor, unhurried, familiar, the step of a man who knew where he was going and was in no particular rush because the destination was not going anywhere. He appeared in the doorway. She didn't look up from her book. "You're early." "I'm always early." "You're always exactly on time. There's a difference." He came into the room. She heard him cross to the fireplace, heard the small sounds of him adding wood, a thing he had begun doing without being asked, somewhere around the 3rd month, and had continued doing without acknowledgement, which was the manner in which they had both found they preferred things to proceed. Quietly, without announcement, simply by doing. She turned a page. "Pemberton has written," he said. "He wants to know if we'll come to them in January." "Tell him yes." "He also says Helena Alderton is threatening to organize some kind of dinner party." Viola looked up at this. "Is she?" "Apparently she has opinions about who should be seated where." He turned from the fireplace. There was something in his expression, the thing she had learned to read over a year of careful daily attention, the thing that lived just beneath the composed surface and came out in moments like this one. Warmth. The private kind, the kind that wasn't performed for rooms. "She says she's been waiting to arrange a table properly for some time." Viola considered this. "Tell her she can arrange whatever she likes, but the seat at the head is mine." He looked at her. "You married a strategist," she said. "I married a woman who was handed a weapon and put it on a table and told me it wasn't one," he said. He crossed the room and sat in the chair beside hers, close enough that their armrests nearly touched, in the easy, settled way of people who had learned the geography of each other. "I have thought about that almost every day since. It was just the right thing to do." "Yes," he said, "it was." He looked at her, the full, unhurried attention she had catalogued at dozens of dinners and drawing rooms before she understood what it was. That was rather the point. Outside, the low winter light moved across the oak avenue. The fire found its rhythm. The room was warm in the way that rooms were warm when they held the right people, not the warmth of performance, not the careful warmth of social occasions, but the deep, unannounced warmth of a place where no one was required to be anything other than what they were. Viola's tea was cold. She drank it anyway. James reached over and took the cup without a word, stood, went to the small table by the door where the pot was kept and poured her a fresh one, set it back beside her, sat down again. She didn't thank him. He didn't expect her to. This was how it went and had gone and would go, the small daily exchanges of a life built not on grand gestures but on the accumulation of careful chosen acts. Wood on the fire, tea poured, a chair pulled out, a letter answered. The long, patient work of two people deciding every day to be present to each other. She turned a page. He picked up his own book. Outside, the pale light held for another few minutes, then let go, and the room settled into the comfortable dark of a December evening that had nowhere to be and nothing to prove. He had once said 4 words to her in a crowded room that he had believed no one would remember. He had been wrong about that. He had been wrong, it turned out, about a great many things, about what mattered in a room, and what a woman without a fortune was worth, and what it felt like to sit beside someone who had every reason not to trust you and had chosen, with open eyes and full knowledge, to stay. He thought about it still. He suspected he always would. Not with shame exactly, shame was a door you closed, with something more like gratitude, the kind that arrived late and quietly and made itself at home. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this Duke story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you'd like to support the channel, you can join as a member or send a super thanks super chat. Your support truly helps us continue bringing these stories to life. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.